What are you really worth? That's a good question.
You are listening to Wealth Talks. What are you worth? You know, back in 1975, savings rates were really high. People believed that they were worth the saving right now, giving up some of what they could have right now in the minute to prepare for the future. And what were those high savings rates like in the 1970s?
Well, they were over 14% of income. People were saving more than 14% of their income in 1975. And interestingly enough, we've never reached those high levels of savings again in this country. And I think a lot of it has to do with people just don't really think they're worth it. We find this when people don't want to purchase any life insurance. They don't want to think about what they bring to this world. What value are they offering to this world? And they don't think of how that needs to be replaced if they're gone. And so it really comes down to, what do you think you're worth? Because a lot of people don't think they're worth anything today.
Yeah. So preparing for the future, how much do you really need to be saving at a minimum in order to create a sustainable, stable financial future?
Well, you know, we look at different models. They're about as accurate as the models we've looked at for this pandemic we're in right now. Some of them are totally exaggerated and some of them are just foolish. But a lot of people say, well, you need 6 months of money saved that you could work without work and you would run out of money. Other people say, oh, you need 3 years. But who is anybody to tell you that? It's what you're worth. What are you worth? You've got to decide that for yourself. And the sad thing is Americans, by and large, over 50% of us don't even have $500 saved for an emergency, let alone 3 months or 3 years.
Yeah, so that's obviously a first priority. What's a good system that would enable somebody to do that on a regular basis, regardless of where they're starting?
Well, those that listen to this podcast on a regular basis know that we really pound the 10-20-70 principle. Not that 10% is going to be enough for anybody to retire at 65 and live happily ever after if they save that much. That's just the beginning. But if we don't start someplace, then people never start because procrastination is so easy to do. Oh, I'll save it tomorrow. I'll wait till next week, or when I have a better job, or when the kids are out of school, then I'll be able to save. And the truth of the matter, that doesn't happen for the majority of people. It's got to be a principle that we apply today, and that is the 10-20-70 principle that is supposedly made more millionaires than any other financial principle there is. And we've written about it, we've talked about it, but 10% of everything you make should be kept. And someone always asks, is that net or gross? And the answer is, how fast do you want it to go?
Yeah. Yeah, so if you want it to go fast, go ahead and do it on the gross. If you want it to go a little bit slower or your cash flow seems tighter, maybe you start with net and get started that way and see where it goes from there.
Of course, 10% isn't going to do it.
Not
if you
for
keep
retirement.
10% of yourself. So you've got to be able to capture the 20% that is walking out the door in your life that's really like bleeding to death, which is the interest you're paying to other people on the credit card debt and consumer debt and personal lines of credit and unsecured debts. Mm-hmm. We're not talking about mortgages or even transportation, automobiles and things like that. We're talking about unsecured debt like credit card debt and personal lines of credit. That is just like slicing your wrist and bleeding to death financially. That has got to stop because Americans are spending billions of dollars a year on that interest. And if they can just divert that interest back to themselves, then they'll be able to keep 30% of their income. Now we're getting close to the point where you can say, oh, you're going to have enough money to live on when you retire. But we're not even there yet, because once we do that, now we've got to say, how many people really need to live on 70% of their income. If we get our debt, our personal lines of credit, our unsecured debt in line, we're keeping 30% of our income. How many people really, really need 70% of the left income to live on? And if they really believe that's true, well, then let's leverage the part you're saving and let's finance some of those things that you think you need out of the 70% to live on. And doing that then forces you to keep even part of the 70%. And now we're getting in a position where you are really becoming the banker in your own life rather than allowing banks and other financial institutes to pull interest from your life for no reason at all, except to enrich themselves. It's the biggest transfer of wealth in America today.
Yeah. So if you're new to the podcast and the 10-20-70, what this is meaning is you take 100% of your income, you take 10%, and that is the minimum that is yours to keep. What are you worth? At least 10%. And you should prove it to yourself if you're not at least keeping 10% of your income right now. 20%, the amount that you're sending to creditors, that's money that you should ultimately be keeping as well. It may take a little bit of time to recover that. And so you need a strategy, you need a plan in order to make that happen. And the 70%, ideally, what about somebody who has a limited income and they're spending more than 70% of their income right now? I mean, if they cut it back too much further than 70%, it could be really tight. What should be, and the 70% is living expenses, by the way. What should they do in that case, though, if that's going to be tight? Should they try to cut it back to 60 or 50% right away for lifestyle?
This is like people that want to go on a diet. And they want to lose weight, they're going to get married or they're going to go on vacation or summer's coming and they want to have a beautiful beach body or whatever it is. And they'll go on a fad diet and they'll lose, 10, 15, 20 pounds within a couple of months. And they're so excited, but then you see them 7 months later and they've gained 30, 40, 50 pounds back because that's what happens if we don't make changes that are permanent in our life. We tend to be more than a yo-yo. We tend to get extremes in both directions. Mm-hmm. It's human nature. And so it happens with fad diets. It happens with people that follow people like Susie Orman or Dave Ramsey, where they're going to cut up their credit cards and never use them again. We meet so many of these people that have gone through those programs and they're in worse debt than they ever started when they started Susie Orman's or Dave Ramsey's program. And they completed that program and got out of debt at one time.
Yeah.
But they never had any sense of financial reward for doing that because when you just cut up your credit cards and pay off your debt, you don't have anything to show for it. Zero is nothing. And zero isn't an incentive to keep doing that forever and ever. Mm-hmm. But the way that we use participating whole life insurance to keep that 10%, we're purchasing an asset that's starting to grow. And that asset, participating whole life insurance, actually builds equity faster than buying a house. Wow. In 8 to 10 to 12 years, you'll have more capital in that policy than you would if you had bought a house, dollar for dollar. And so now we've got this carrot in front of the person that's trying to get out of debt, and they're getting rewarded for it, and they see that right there in front of them. Oh, this is really, really cool. And then when they get out there in year 10 or 11 and they're paying, a premium for this policy and they're getting a whole lot more annual cash value growth in that policy, mm-hmm. Sometimes it's even 50 to 60% more than what they paid, that their cash value is growing by that time. They go, wow, I should have started this a long time ago instead of waiting until I did. And that's the other thing. Procrastination is really a killer. And people don't see the need for it because they haven't been set up in a system that's rewarding them and for the behavior that they're starting to develop.
Yeah. So the life insurance provides a reward. You're building an asset while you're getting out of debt.
Yes.
So you're not just back at zero when you're done. You actually have an asset to show for this. And this is so important.
It's critical because human nature will not continue to plug away at something they do not see any potential or any reward for what they're doing. Yeah. It's just contrary to what we do.
So the question arises, we can use life insurance as this asset, But couldn't we use some other sort of financial vehicle maybe and make this work kind of sort of similar? Or why is life insurance the best for
Well,
this type of strategy?
that brings up a really good question, because years ago when we first started this, you remember this, John, we developed a game called the IBC game.
Yes.
The Infinite Banking Concepts game. We worked on it and worked on it and worked on it, and we even worked on it during a vacation when we were at a beach house, and
Yes.
and we played it all together, and you did the math, and everyone was doing the math. And then we had a group of agents in, and we had them play the game, and they couldn't do the math. And these are people that are teaching IBC, and they can't do the math. They were getting wrong numbers. They were figuring the math wrong. And we go, oh, this is we just wasted our time. We can't make a board game out of this.
Yeah.
And
We knew we had to do an app.
So we did an app. And we did an app, and the math was done for them. Yeah. And what that map did is we used a 401k, we used a savings account, we paid cash, or we used a life insurance policy. And regardless of which one you use, the life insurance comes out ahead all the time, because it does not lose its guaranteed growth or the dividends while you're leveraging the money. Mm-hmm. If you use your 401k, then you lose the interest on it, and you have to pay that interest back with after-tax dollars, and you get double taxed on it when you take it out again. If you use cash, you lose the interest altogether, because you pull your cash out of an interest-bearing account, it's not going to earn anything. You spend it, now you got to build the principal and the interest back that you lost.
Yeah, that's called lost opportunity. And that's a really hard one to pin down, because if it's gone, it's kind of the road not taken.
It is. It's unseen.
Yeah.
And it's like Bastia used to write about the broken window. The little boy throws a rock in the broken window, and everyone says, well, he should be rewarded because now the glazer had to be called, and the person that made the glass. And look at all the economy that was stimulated because that boy broke a window. But what they didn't see is the windows shop was the butcher shop, and the butcher wasn't able to buy his little boy a pair of shoes, and the person that made the shoes is out of work, and the farmer that sells the leather is out of work, and on and on and on. Yeah. So that's the unseen. That's the opportunity lost.
Yeah. Just destruction does not create value ever.
No.
Yeah. So lost opportunity, that's definitely an important part there. And that's one of the things the life insurance allows us to recover then, isn't it?
It is. That's one of the biggest things it allows us to do. And it allows us to use our dollar more than one time. Mm-hmm. And that's really a hard concept to understand. But if you read wealthy people's shareholders' notes, like Warren Buffett or Jeff Bezos or Elon Musk or any of these people that have public trading people contributing to their account, they are managing other people's money. And they use that money over and over and over again and pay the people one time a year, either a dividend or a rate of return, or both. And that's called free cash flowing. And that is so, so important in becoming your own banker and using the perpetual wealth code to develop true wealth that's going to last. But if we don't have this fundamental 10% starting account, then you never have money to leverage, because nobody lines up behind you to give you money like they do Jeff Bezos. And they certainly don't do that to me, and probably don't do it to anyone listening today. Mm-hmm. It's only people that have, had a IPO and they're in the market and they're collecting and they're willing to jump through all those hoops to manage other people's money, that they get the opportunity to do that.
Yeah, so you basically need a place where you can manage your own money, because nobody's lining up to give us money like they are to Warren Buffett or Jeff Bezos and other people that are investing in the stock. So that's a good point there. Now, why is right now such an opportune time to start a life insurance policy? Because, we've seen all the market turmoil since the beginning of this year. Started a few months in. The S&P 500 is way down. And some people are questioning whether it's ever going to come back. Of course, if you listen to the podcast with George Gilder a couple of weeks ago, his thinking along that and why this could be a great time for learning. But why is it also a great time for starting a life insurance policy and getting this financial foundation rolling in your own life?
Well, I remember Walter Uppergrave, after writing in, I think it was CNN Money, after the 2008 crash. And he says, oh, don't worry about it. Just hold tight. You earn 12% a year, and then in the next 10 years, you'll be right back where you started. And I remember thinking at the time, what a lie. Because you won't be right back where you started. You'll be 10 years behind time because your capital will not have grown to anything greater than it was before the 2008 crash. So you just lost 10 years of your time. And time is money. And so starting today, when the market has been hit again, completely out of the blue. Nobody saw it coming, really. Nobody would have thought that we would have been forced to stay home from our jobs for so long. Nobody could have foreseen this in 100 years. Yeah, it's just a phenomenal thing. But what we can do, looking backward, is we can see that these type of unplanned events happen very frequently.
They do. More than experts would like you to think.
We can't pinpoint when they're going to happen. We can just say, looking back, we can say, oh, it happened in 1968, it happened in 1958, it happened in 1918. We can go back and see when just flu bugs or viruses caused something like this to happen. And we can go back and we can look at, the real estate crash in the 80s. We can look at the dot-com bubble in 2000. We can look at 2007 and the real estate fiasco that caused the Great Recession. So these things happened a lot more frequently than people want to.
Yeah. And hindsight's always 20/20, but
yes. Yeah. And every time that happens, people have to not necessarily start all over, but they have to start and build back what they lost. And, just the other day, someone said, oh, we had the highest stock market returns since 1934. Big deal. Still, people have lost money from where they were at the first of the year because it takes more growth to get back to where you were than what you lost.
Yes.
So if you lost 10%, you got to earn 11%. If you lost 25%, you got to earn 33%. And people don't understand that. So if we look back into the S&P 500, which is the measure of the top 500 companies, stock companies, and we go back 20 years, what if we had bought and held the S&P 500 in December of 1999 till January 1st, 2020? That's before this. That's before this happened. It's earning just a little bit over 4%.
That's not all that much.
That's not a huge amount of money. Well, life insurance, because of its tax preference nature, can beat that. That's why it's a good time to start saving, because you're working with companies that aren't invested in high risk. They've got actuarial science, and they understand that they can pay a certain amount guaranteed until you die. And if you die before that, then they got to pay the death benefit. So they have this all planned out. They know how much that they can comfortably afford to promise you. It's in the contract. If they make more than that, guess what? They're going to share the profits with you in the form of a dividend. It's just that simple. So it's a great way to start. And then as the market gets going back, or if you see opportunities in a depressed market, you can borrow from the cash value and you can make those investments. You can reap those profits, and you got a place to keep it then.
Yeah, no need to be stuck in a market when you're concerned that it might be going down in the future.
Right. Yeah. We just, was reading Warren Buffett's position in American Airlines, all American Airlines, not just American Airlines, but Delta and Southwest. And he says he dropped all of his stock in it because it is no longer a worthy investment for Berkshire Hathaway to make.
Yeah, he says I made a mistake.
And the biggest mistake that he sees coming in the future is that the government now owns part of those stocks, and he has realized that when the government owns stock, it's very hard for that company ever to get over that basically corporate welfare. And he didn't want anything to do with it.
That's interesting.
That's coming from a Democrat. That's amazing.
Yeah, it is amazing. So, this risk avoidance thing, and some people will look at the actuarial science and they'll say, well, this is similar to the type of math that the life insurance companies are using, are similar to the types of math that people are using in the market and investment companies use to, quote, manage risk there. But why is the same math applied in investments not the same as when it's applied in life insurance?
Well, investments don't have term insurance to be sold. Life insurance companies sell a lot of term insurance, and there's less than 2% of those term policies that ever pay a death benefit. So who gets to keep all that money and invest it forever?
The life insurance companies.
The life insurance. Also, the life insurance company is looking at very low risk investments when they do invest. They're not looking for high returns. They don't have to look at quarterly returns for people. They're not trying to show phenomenal results. They're trying to do the slow and steady. So they use short-term bonds, mid-range bonds that have a guaranteed yield and have a probability that they're going to mature before they're sold again. And so doing that, historically, for hundreds of years, they've been able to make 4%. And that's what they base their guarantees on. Now, to make it even more secure, they take away their mortality costs from that.
And that's a key here that the investment side does not have, the mortality experience there. You're not going to have extreme mortality experience unless maybe you have a nuclear bomb that comes and wipes everyone out. But even going to 9/11 and big catastrophic events that happen there's not any extreme outlying events.
Right.
As you look at mortality over a long period of time.
Well, even with this pandemic
that's a very
right now,
stable way to apply these mathematics.
A lot of people are concerned. Well, aren't the life insurance companies concerned about this pandemic?
Yeah.
They're not really. They really aren't,
No.
because they see the statistical averages are 1% or less of the population. They've already figured that into the actuarial science. They know that happens on such a frequent basis that it's already figured into there.
Yeah, not too much worse than a regular flu season.
No.
Yeah. So that's a huge thing with risk avoidance. The life insurance companies are applying some of the same mathematics that the investment companies are using, yes, but they're applying it to a totally different type of data.
They are.
And that's why they can have so much better guarantees than the investment companies that are trying to hedge against the investments themselves with derivatives of those different investments. There's always going to be a risk. Sometimes you just end up hiding that risk when you're dealing with data that is referencing itself.
That's correct.
It becomes a recursive self-reference after a while, and that becomes a big problem.
Yeah, it reminds me of you cannot define a word by using the word in it, and yet investments are defining the prospectus on other prospectus. I mean, they
refer back and forth. Yes,
repeat the same data over and over again and refer back to it and base this figure on the figure that came from. It's not a unique situation.
Yeah.
And so you cannot use the same word to define a word, and you can't use the same statistic to find a new statistic. You've got to base that research on fact, and that's what actuarial science has done for the insurance companies that the investment world doesn't have. They are dealing with mortality, and they know the mortality rates, and they change those mortality rates frequently, about every 10 years, because Americans live longer, they die from other causes, and they know what those statistics are.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, so that's good information. So what about, you mentioned here a while ago about the insurance companies base the returns on a 4% guarantee. Then they subtract mortality and other expenses. It leads up to a question that we were asked just the other day. Life insurance company, if I'm getting a 4% guaranteed rate and on the policy, that's what it's based on, and I'm paying 5% on a policy loan, does that mean my net cost is 1%?
Well,
it's a little bit more complex than that, isn't it?
I chuckle because that's what I was taught when we bought our first policy, and I was naive enough to believe it. I didn't check the math. But if you take your premium paid this year and your guaranteed cash value for the first year in the policy, it's not 4%.
No, it isn't.
It's not 4%. And the reason is you are buying something. You are buying a death benefit. And a death benefit in a whole life policy becomes yours. You actually develop equity in it, and you own paid up insurance. And the more paid up insurance you have in that contract, the more cash value you have. So the paid up insurance is like paying off a house. Every time you make a payment, you own more of the mortgage than the bank. And eventually you own the whole mortgage, and the bank doesn't own anything of it.
Mm-hmm.
Well, with a life insurance policy, it's guaranteed to be paid up at maturity, which means that the cash value and the death benefit will equal each other. So, for that reason, you can easily see that you're not earning 4% on that. Now, the insurance company is earning 4% on your premium
Yes,
dollars.
they are.
And they know they have done that consecutively for 100 years or more. That's why they can say, we're going to base this on a 4% guarantee minus mortality expenses. So they know how many people are going to die this year. So they subtract whatever those death benefits were from those profits of 4%, and the expenses to run the company, which includes commissions and electric bills and salaries of all the people that work at the insurance company. They take that away from the 4%, and they still have a profit to guarantee the policyholder.
Yeah.
And when we
And they have had profits for
Yes.
some of them, many of them over 100 years.
and that is what the guarantee is based on.
Yeah.
And then if they make more than 4%, now we're getting into dividend territory, because the way these mutual companies are set up, they cannot retain those extra earnings because it was earned on the premium dollars that the policyholders made. And so the policyholders then get to share in those profits according to what the board of directors votes will be there, just like any other dividend in any other company is decided by the board of directors.
Which brings up another question. So the 4% guarantee here, the dividends are and everything are on top of that. If mortality or expenses was a little bit different and the company had made a profit, obviously they could make an adjustment for that before sharing the rest of the profit with the company, with the policyholders. But what happens if, let's say that they earn 4%, that just their guarantee, and let's say that mortality or expenses were a little worse than they expected? Can they go back and change the guaranteed values on a policy, or are those guaranteed values set in stone regardless of what happens to all the different rates?
Well, they're called guaranteed for a reason, because that's the legally binding contract of a life insurance policy. That would be like saying, if I die, just because the insurance company didn't make any money, they don't have to pay me the whole death benefit to my beneficiaries. No, you can't
they
get away
do.
from that.
Yeah.
The guarantees are the part of that death benefit that you own, so they can't shortchange you on that. That's already paid for.
Yes.
They're just maintaining it for you. They're still watching over that part of the death benefit for you, but you own it, so
Yes.
they can't take it away from you.
Totally. And that's a great point, because some, especially if you start talking about universal life insurance, those factors can be changed.
Oh, they can definitely
But
be changed.
with the whole life value guarantees, the guaranteed values on a whole life policy, no changes there. So you can rest assured there. That's a true financial foundation of guarantees.
Well, a good example of that, we go to AIG, the largest insurance company in the world. It wasn't a mutual company, but it went insolvent in 2008. Now,
Yes.
it can't go bankrupt. Insurance companies are legally not allowed to go bankrupt. It's against the law. They can become insolvent because any company can become insolvent by poor money management. And that's what happened to AIG in 2007 and 2008. Interestingly enough, nobody lost any money. No policyholder lost money with AIG, because what happens is the contracts that they weren't able to fulfill, they were forced by the commissioners to pass on to reinsurers or other companies that wanted that, because that's an asset for another company to manage. Just because AIG wasn't capable of managing it doesn't mean another company can't. And so those contracts got dispersed to other people, and the name on the policy changed, but the contract stayed the same.
Nice. That's important.
It is. It's a unilateral contract. Unilateral means that once it's signed and the contestability period's gone, the insurance company cannot change it.
Yeah. So guarantees, that is something you get with whole life insurance that you get with no other type of asset at near the same level.
That's correct.
And so then we can get into the dividend territory. And what happens when we do that? And maybe the company makes a 6% profit instead of just 4%.
So, insurance companies are really opposed to risk. And so if they make an extra 6%, they're not going to share all of that with policyholders, because they realize that next year things might be a little bit tough. There might be a coronavirus next year. Their
Sure.
mortality might be a little bit higher. And so they're going to put part of that into reserves, maybe 1.5%. And then they're going to declare a dividend of maybe 4.5% to 5%. And a lot of people think, I'm going to see my cash values go up by 5%. Again, that's a wrong assumption. It's an assumption that's being taught a lot.
Yeah.
Same thing with the policy loan that you took up earlier. You know, people say, well, my dividend's 5% and the policy loan is 4%. I'm making 1%. That's not true. It's a 5% profit in addition to the 4% that the insurance company knew they were going to make. So that 5% is then divided up equally among all the policyholders in that block of business that, according to the premiums they paid, because it was their premiums that created that dividend.
And that's a good point. So if you can't rely on the quoted dividend rates or the quoted guaranteed rate, can you rely on an internal rate of return when you're looking at the policy values and calculate it based on that?
Well, an internal rate of return is used in investments to see how much money do I have to make in 5 years to see if it's worthwhile putting this money down today. And when that zeroes out, I know that I've broken even.
Yes.
Well, we can do that retrospectively in a policy and see what the internal rate of return is. We can look at what the compound annual growth or the annualized rate of growth is in a policy by figuring it out. But again, those are
retrospective.
They're retrospective.
Yes.
You can't look for it. Now, you can do that in the guarantee column.
Sure.
When we go to the dividend side of the column, the non-guaranteed part of the contract, and we try to do that, we're no better than the speculators because we do not know what that dividend is going to be 10 years from now. We don't know what it's going to be at the end of the year even. It's only when the board of directors meets and decides what that dividend is going to be. Now, here's another thing that throws a kink into all that is no regulation says exactly how a dividend has to be reported on an illustration or in a life insurance contract. So some companies are prone to exaggerate their dividends by not taking any idea of mortality or expenses out of it, and others are more faithful and diligent to be more realistic in taking those projected mortality expenses and operating expenses out of it, making their dividends a little bit more realistic. And a good way for you to figure that out is to see how much the dividend is and compare how much extra paid-up insurance it bought. You're going to be able to see that. And if that dividend is exaggerated, you're going to see a relatively lower amount of paid-up insurance being purchased with it.
Yeah. Now, to clarify, on most illustrations, you will not see a special column that shows you how much dividend that or how much paid up additions that your dividend bought. It is possible to figure that out, though. So this isn't something you have to do on your own. If you want to look at your policy and see what's happening with your policy, give us a call and we'll be able to help you walk through that and see exactly how much paid up additions the dividends that are projected on your policy are going to buy.
You know, the truth of the matter is that everybody needs life insurance because life insurance is not just for the death benefit. Life insurance is used by those who understand money because it helps them transfer wealth without taxes. It helps them set up proper estate planning. It helps them have a retirement fund that's not taxed so that their Social Security, they get to keep it all instead of having to give part of it back to the government. It's a way to eliminate the fact that the stretch IRA has been wiped out and no longer is available for people that have been able to keep a lot of money in a 401k or an IRA and wanting to skip a generation and go to the next. That's no longer possible with the tax code, but life insurance still allows you to do that. So maybe, just maybe, Susie Orman is lightening up and figuring out that, maybe I haven't been completely forthright by telling this, but I don't know. I didn't look into that any more than to see that. Wait a second. She said all the time, you won't need life insurance when you get to be 54, 55, 60 years old. Now she's telling them, you can buy it dirt cheap over here. Go figure.
Go figure. And, the life insurance death benefit, when you are that age, even if you don't need it for income replacement, it does provide a very good planning tool for extending your passive income options.
Oh, absolutely.
And, of course, providing a legacy. Some people don't care about leaving a legacy when they're in their 30s, 40s, but as they get older, they tend to want to leave a legacy most of the time.
They do.
Yeah.
The nice thing is that life insurance, the younger you buy it, the less you're going to pay for it your entire life. Because if you buy it when you're 22, you're going to pay for life insurance as a 22-year-old for the rest of your life if you buy a participating whole life insurance policy. So people like Susie Orman and Dave Ramsey that have discouraged people from purchasing life insurance, in my opinion, have a lot to answer for, because now people are getting into their mid 50s and early 60s and saying, man, I really need some life insurance because of this, that, or another thing. And now they've got to pay for it as a 55-year-old and 60-year-old,
It's more
which is
expensive.
a much more expensive than if they had bought it when they were 22.
Sure is.
You know, if they had bought it when they were 22, by the time they were 30, they would have overcome the cost of insurance. And now it might be until they're 90.
Yeah. Yeah, so true. So resources for today's show, you can find the 10-20-70 budget system worksheet. There's a special worksheet that goes with the 10-20-70 system that we talked about. That will be in the resources for you today. Also, the book Winning Your Financial Game, because this is really about thinking differently about your money. And Winning Your Financial Game can help you to do that. There's each one of the chapters is built around a lesson, a moral, if you will, almost, that you can take and apply in your financial life to keep more of the money that you make.
Well, it's been said that the human race goes insane in masses, and they only regain their sanity one at a time. And we see this cycle. We've lived through it twice now, where everyone thinks that there is no losing by investing in the stock market or investing in real estate. And now, wham, they get hit, and they go, oh, where can I get some guarantees instead of just speculation? And then it won't be long before everyone's back, mass insanity, thinking that, oh, this market's going to go up forever, and wham, they're going to get hit again. But those that are keeping their money safe and participating in life insurance don't experience those radical swings. It's a steady growth, and that steady growth surpasses the violent, volatile swings of the market. And not that you don't participate in the market from time to time, but you can get out when you see the times are going to get a little rough selling, and you have a place to keep your assets very, very stable and not lose a bunch of capital.
That's important. That's hugely important. You are listening to Wealth Talks with Dr. Tom and John McPhee, bringing you the facts so you can thrive in life. Have a wonderful week.